For those of you who were here for the last session, you get to hear me talk again. For those that are new, we've got an exciting 20 minutes of a demo theater where we're going to be talking about preparing apps for high demand. So I will start. My name's Kelly Giroux Wilcox. I'm a product manager with ArcGIS Online. This is?
My name is Beth Romero. I'm a product manager with ArcGIS Online. My name is Beth Romero.
You gotta turn it on.
All right, now we're working. My name is Beth Romero. I'm a product engineer with ArcGIS Online.
All right, so today we're going to talk about preparing your apps for high demand. Do you want to go to the?
Yep.
And we're going to talk about two different parts. Beth's going to talk about the app planning part of creating apps that could go viral. And I'm going to talk about some best practices to really take advantage of the scalability with ArcGIS Online. So if you notice this little heartbeat design graph right there, what this is actually it's actually our traffic that we received between September and October last year during the wildfire season. And you can see that we had about the same amount of traffic for quite some time, and then all of a sudden there was a huge spike in the amount of traffic that we had in ArcGIS Online. It was actually triple the amount of traffic that we usually have. And what happened is there was a lot of wildfires in California, which were using a bunch of different apps with ArcGIS Online. So what we're really going to talk about today is how to plan, just in case your apps do go viral and do get a lot of traffic, volume, high demand, and then we've put in a bunch of new technology. Jeremy talked a little bit about it at plenary today, but we're also going to go through some of the caching that we've actually put in to help these apps and these layers scale.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the conceptual planning of an app. So we're going to go into just reviewing, finding out what your messaging is, determining who your audience is, and then figuring out the intended experience. So the first thing when you're building your app to think about really is, what is your message? What's the story you're trying to tell? There's some questions here that you can think about when you're planning this. What's the key information you want to display? What should the app audience know when they're visiting the app or when they're leaving the app? And what's the call to action? I really like to focus on the call to action. When someone comes to your app, what do you want them to do, and what should they do to make sure they get the information from the app? And a good thing to remember is just to keep it simple. Figure out what that call to action is. It should be kind of single purpose applications are always successful. Next is, who is your audience? So think about either, maybe it's going to be a few select users, and these are GIS analysts, and they're more familiar with more complex tools and they can set up user parameters, or is it going to be the entire world? And the app needs to be fast, it needs to be simple, and it needs to be focused. Some apps are focused for local citizens or emergency responders. And something else to keep in mind is maybe this app will get picked up by the media and embedded into like a local news story or really any web page. So once you've determined your audience, you have to think about maybe something going viral unintentionally. And I like to think of the cheese sandwich from the Fire Festival. People paid $12,000 to go to this music festival, and somebody tweeted a picture of the cheese sandwich, and now this sandwich is the reference for the failure of that music festival. So you have to think about things unintentionally going viral, maybe because it's relevant in the current news media, or someone surfing the web, or your town or city comes in the news all of a sudden. And finally, what's the intended experience? What are you trying to communicate? How long do you expect them to interact with the app? Configuring your map and app so that your pop-up is showing the information you want it to show. You have the tool that needs to be used, focused and ready to be used. Does your data need to be editable? Are you going to collect information? Is it really necessary to have a collection of base maps available to this person where they can switch in between? So I'm going to do a quick demo and show kind of an example of a poorly planned app and then one that has more of a single focus. So The message I'm trying to show here is I have a community just east of Redlands, and I want them to be able to look up and determine, are they in an evacuation zone or not? Here's the first example of an app that maybe doesn't have an intended experience planned out well. I look at this and I'm a member of this community, and right away I'm seeing multiple states. It's very busy. I come in here, I'm like, okay, I'm going to type in the name of my city, see if I'm in the zone. Click on it, I do a search. Now I just sort of see some red. I don't know what this means. I'm going to start opening up. Oh, okay, I'm in the zone, but now I see some direction to click a widget. I don't really know what that is. Let's go through here. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. I open up the widget now. Maybe this will give me different information. Type in the same things. And now I get something returned telling me I'm in this mandatory evacuation status. Here's an app that has a little more focus to it. Right away I open it up, the Near Me widget is open. I don't need to tell my audience to come in and populate it. I don't need to reference the word widget. I'm going to type in Forest Falls again. One click and text is returning telling me I'm in current mandatory evacuation status. So just to recap, that's an example of simplifying your app, making sure the call to action is focused and ready to go. What is a viral application? I mean, this is really kind of a subjective definition. For some people, that would maybe mean 500 views per hour. For others, maybe you're getting upwards of 50,000 views per hour. And what we really want to talk about today is whatever that definition is for you, you should be planning for it. So Kelly's going to talk a little bit about layers and scalability. And moving forward in this planning phase, we're going to have the assumptions that we're creating an app that potentially could be used by the entire world. We want it to be performant. We want that app to load quickly, so no more than 3 seconds. All components need to withstand up to 1,000 requests per second. And finally, users can figure out what tool they need to use or the information they need to glean from this app in less than 3 clicks. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly.
All right. So I'm going to chat a little bit about choosing the right layers. And what I'm really going to talk about are hosted feature layers and something called hosted feature tiles, which are different than tile layers. So when you're building an app that you are expecting to go viral, one of the big things, especially with a viral map, is it's going to be shared publicly. So in order to take advantage of any of the caching that we have available, the layer needs to be public. If it's secured and only shared with a select group of users, realistically, it's not going to get as large of an amount of traffic. So we don't put all of these additional safety checks in for non-public layers. So everything that I'm talking about assumes that the layer is public. When you're picking a hosted layer, why would you pick a hosted feature layer? Well, one, it's hosted in Esri's cloud. So with an ArcGIS Online hosted layer, we have technology built to scale. So if all of a sudden we are getting that high peak of requests, then that's something where our development team has an automated process to add more resources. So that's one of the benefits if you are going to publish something that is potentially going to go viral. We really recommend putting those layers in ArcGIS Online unless you have someone dedicated to managing the scalability of your own local server. And by local server that you manage, it could also be in the cloud. But yes. The other thing is HTTPS is automatically enabled on all ArcGIS Online services. This is something that's coming up more and more as browser security is increasing. So it's a nice way to ensure that your layers are going to be accessible through secure browsers. Chrome's starting to require this all the time. There's many websites that are. So that's a great thing about hosted feature services. If you're not using hosted feature services, now is the time to enable SSL or HTTPS on your organization. Feature tiles can display a lot of data. So you saw in the plenary today, there is hundreds of thousands of points and features all being rendered client side. They're fast, they're responsive. This comes from feature tiles. We're able to query and store that data and interact with it client side using the GPU. So there's really no practical limit. There's, I guess, no real limit. There is a practical limit of how much data that you can actually show using these vector feature tiles. With hosted feature layers, the data the data is displayed live. So if there's an update made, if there's an update made to the layer, then you'll see it almost immediately, depending on what your settings are. And then you can also change the visualizations without needing to cook tiles. So it's really responsive and flexible to change. All right. So when we start looking at ArcGIS Online Scalability, it's really our caching and how we cache what we call request responses that makes it highly scalable. We take a lot of pressure off the database side using this caching, which allows us to really have huge amounts of demand for these vector services. So we've got three main response caching levels. One is the browser cache. If you've ever been doing something and you're like, oh, this isn't quite working, and then you're like, oh, I need to clear my browser cache because something's probably stuck. That's usually where you start seeing the browser cache. So that's if something is actually stored on your client, a request, it'll be real fast. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. If this demo doesn't work, it's always the browser cache that's causing it. The other part is the content delivery network cache. So we also call this a CDN, and this is something that's available to all public layers. So this is where we take our request responses and cache them all over the world. It makes them a lot faster for you to just to have the request, especially when it's a request that's accessed on a regular basis, and it's accessible all over the world. So if you're in New Zealand, which I believe is the end of the internet, you can get it to be a little bit faster if you're accessing kind of the CDN that's closer than kind of coming all the way back to the US. And then we've got the feature tile cache. So if you're using feature tiles, we have some server-side caching that will keep that information. So when we take a look at how we actually use the cache, let's say we've got a layer in an application. The first thing that happens is a query is made to the feature layer. Next, what happens is our API checks the browser cache and say, hey, does the browser cache have the latest data? If the answer is no, then we go and we look in the CDN and say, hey, does the CDN have the latest data? If the answer there is still no, then, hey, does the feature tile cache have the latest data? And if the answer there is no, then we go and we execute a query in the database. So queries in the database are limited like all databases. So there's a maximum amount depending kind of on the amount of traffic you're having. So if we can keep the repetitive requests up in the CDN, then we don't put any pressure on the database and it scales quite nicely. So what I'm going to show now is some of the new cache controls that we've added to ArcGIS Online. Okay. No, I'm 3. All right, so we'll take a look at this Colorado Trails map, and we'll take a look at some of the developer tools and the network responses to see if we can tell where when requests are being cached on the CDN and when they aren't. So the idea of this app is I would like to create a Trails map where I have a few selective Trails maintenance workers who can actually go and add different trails to it. But I also want to share this publicly. And because I know the whole world wants to go hiking in Colorado right now, I want to make sure that it's going to scale if all of a sudden 1 million people are looking at it at the exact same time. So I'll open up the developer tools. Preserve. And I'm going to go ahead and just refresh this layer, this map. And a great way to find out when you're actually making a query to the feature layer is if you just type query up here in the, if you hit type query in the filter. And as you can see here in the Xcache, I'm getting misses from CloudFront. So this means that I'm not actually using the CDN. I'm going right to the database each time I would load this. So there's a few reasons for that, but what I really want to do is make sure that I'm actually hitting the CDN. So if we go and take a look at, you'll notice that there's an edit here, which is a lot of what's causing this. But if we go to the actual layer, I can take a look at the settings. And you'll see that editing is enabled. So anytime that editing is enabled, we don't put that content in the CDN. The reason for that is the data is updating, or we assume the data is updating so often that we're not going to send that to the CDN. We really don't recommend sharing publicly editable layers unless you're crowdsourcing. One, for security reasons, because you don't want people just editing your data. And two, it doesn't take advantage of the CDN caching that we have available. You'll also see that there is this capability down here called cache control. And this is where you can actually manage how long you store the results of requests on the CDN. You'll notice that I don't have an option right now. Again, that's because the layer is editable. You cannot set the cache control for the CDN with an editable layer. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and make a view-only feature layer view. So I'll create a view layer. And we'll go take a look at the settings on this new view layer. Do, 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 do. I feel like we need some better music. Do, do. All right. All right. So we should be going to the new hosted feature layer view. We'll go and take a look at the settings. And you can see here that editing is not enabled. And that's by default. I could enable it, but I don't want to because this is going to be a view-only layer. But I also have the ability to set the cache control. This is something new that's coming in the March release, that you're able to set the cache control of views separately. But instead of saying the same as the source layer being never, I'm going to set the cache control for 5 minutes. And what this means is the CDN is going to keep my response cache for 5 minutes before it looks to refresh it. If I'm updating data every 30 seconds, my users might need to wait 5 minutes before they actually see the updates. Very rarely does data update that quickly, but it also relieves the pressure on the database if your data is not updating frequently. So it's a really great thing if your data is not updating super frequently. So I'll go ahead and I'll save this. And I might just... We're going to hope that that went through. And I'll open this up in the map viewer, and we can see the difference in how we're actually seeing, and how this is actually, and how we're actually seeing this come from the CDN. So I'll go back in here, hit query. Okay, well, that's at least there. All right, so we'll give it one more refresh. And what we should start seeing here is something that says refresh from CloudFront. Oh, good, and it's all missing. I'm going to blame the browser cache again, but part of it's there. We'll give this one more try, but if you see here, we can actually see that the cache control has been set on the layer. So if you actually take a look at the request, you'll see down here that it says cache control max age. So that's how we know that we've actually set the cache control, and it's going to be sitting and waiting for 5 minutes before it's refreshed. Here with this X features cache, this is where we can find out that it's actually a vector tile query cache. I'll try one more time. And if not, it's definitely the browser cache, or come find me later. Oh, I know what it is. I didn't share it publicly. Okay. Sorry, I did not. I'm not as good as Shannon with my typing. I do make spelling mistakes. Okay, so I'll go ahead and share with everyone. Update the sharing on my layer. And now let's take a look at these dev tools, if not. Oh my goodness. Okay. And we're probably gonna move it over to Beth. And once I've got this working again, I'll show you guys. Okay, sure. So basically, when you're creating an app for viral, an app that might go viral, we recommend following this checklist. So number one, disable editing on all public feature layers. If you have an app that's going viral, you usually get a call from me if editing's on. Yep, you don't want a phone call from me. No, I'm not that. I'm not that mean. The other thing is set a cache control with an interval which aligns with the data update schedule. So in the user interface, there's a minimum of 5 minutes, but if you go through, if you actually go through the admin API, you can set it for less time. But 5 minutes is usually kind of the minimum that we suggest. You want to make sure that all layers and links are using HTTPS. As I mentioned, this is going to become a harder requirement kind of as we move into the future. You can always use tile layers for static data. So if you have data that's not drawing quickly or is not performing as you'd like and it's not updating, think about using tile layers. Sometimes they're just so fast that, and you don't need to have that access to kind of the other things that you need through feature layers, so they can be a great option. Only include tools and layers that are relevant to your intended message, like Beth showed. And then ensure that the interactive experience is intuitive and easy to understand. A lot of times when our audience is the public, the simpler the app, the more focused the app, the easier it is and the more successful our users are with it. And then the last thing is test your app and test it again and test it again to make sure that you've followed through everything and maybe that you've shared your layers publicly. And Beth's going to show us a little bit about that.
All right, I'm going to do a quick demo on just setting proxies for subscription content. So when you're configuring an app and you're using subscription content, you'll see this subscriber content checklist right here. This is where testing your app and just making sure it works in a variety of different ways is always helpful. So in this app, I have it set to arcgis.com, not my org name, and I'm just going to refresh it. I'm not logged in, make sure that I can view this. I don't have a singing voice like Kelly, so we're just going to wait in silence. The data came through and I can see everything. Now, in this example, I'm going to launch this app. I haven't checked it, so people wouldn't have access to it. So I'm like going through my checklist. Let's launch it, see if I have access to it. And if I were, testing this app, I'd be like, oh, this is great. I launched it. It works. So one other thing you can do that I think is always helpful is take your apps, go into an incognito window, and just make sure you can access it from there. One other helpful tip, too, that I think is just removing the org name and putting www in, and that always will ensure that if you're going to need to log in, it'll prompt you. All right, so it's loading the app. and it looked like it was about to load, but because I didn't check that subscriber content, now I'm getting prompted to log in. So make sure you test your apps in a variety of different ways. If you have some great content and you've shared it out there, and then someone hits this and they get to a login, they're like, what is this? That's definitely going to deter them. So just some helpful tips when you're going through testing.
All right, and I have this working on developer tools now. So one last time, if it doesn't work while you guys are watching, then we know that's what the cause is and it's not me. But I'll go ahead and I'll refresh this. And you can watch here. We should start seeing hit from CloudFront. There we go. So we can see there that it's actually coming from the CDN network and it's not missing from the CDN network. So that's really what we're looking for something that's prepared to go viral. All right. That's it. Thank you very much. We've got like 2 minutes while the other people come and set up. Any questions? Yeah. I waited about 20 seconds. Really, sometimes it gets caught up in your browser cache when you're trying to demo this. But generally, if you wait like 30 seconds, you'll start seeing it. If you're seeing the miss from CloudFront, like that, like that's something to be concerned about if you think that it's going to be going viral. Yeah. The question was, are there plans to restrict the CDN to particular regions? And not right now.